Now, as the name of the video implies, this is the sixth part of a story, so if you haven't seen the first several parts yet, I'd highly recommend checking them out first, or this likely won't make any sense to you. Links to all previous parts will be found in the description below. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the story. We start on a beach on the same lush blue and green world we've been to several times before, and find ourselves watching as the boy, though it's hard to still call him that because he appears several years older than the last time we saw him, and is now very much a man, sits in the sand with a branch in his hand, absent-mindedly drawing pictures in the sand. And it's only when he hears the voice of the girl, though she too is obviously several years older now, that he seems to be able to pull himself away from his thoughts as she says to him, "You are thinking about him again, aren't you?" The boy then looks up at her, gives her a bit of a smile and says, "What makes you think that?" The girl motions down at the picture he's drawn in the sand, of a man wearing a mask sitting atop an orb that seems to represent a planet. The girl then asks, "What happened to him?" And to that the boy sighs, tosses the stick away, and says as he gets to his feet, "I've told you before, he gave his life for you, to make you better. You would have died if you hadn't." The girl then moves forward a few steps, takes the boy by the hand, and says as she looks intently into his eyes, "What really happened to him?" "That is what really happened to him," he says back, looking both a little frustrated and angry, as if this is a question she's asked him many times over the years. He then continues, "Master even said with his last words that he saw our future together, what it would lead to." The boy then looks past the girl, down the beach a ways, to where there are two very young children, a boy and a girl who appear to be twins, playing in the sand. "He said we'd forever be bound to them, and that our lives together would feel endless." To that, the girl seems to try and smile, but simply cannot. She then asks, "And you're sure he's gone forever?" The boy looks down and nods somberly as he says, "In the end, he just faded away." He then looks up and sees that this news seems to trouble the girl a great deal, and before he can ask why, she blurts out, "Our son is unwell. I fear whatever illness I once had, he now has." The boy lets out a bit of a laugh, and he looks past the girl again and gazes upon his son who plays happily in the sand down the beach. "He looks fine to me," the boy says with a shrug. But the girl steadfastly shakes her head and says, "No, he may not be showing any signs yet, but I'm his mother, and I can just sense when he's not well." The boy gives her a skeptical look and says back, "Well, I'm his father, and I don't sense anything. Besides, the Force has always been stronger with me than you." The mother gives him a bit of a confused look and asks, "Why do you call it that now, the Force? Master always referred to it as the essence of life." The father looks reluctant to answer, but then finally does and says, "When you were ill, I met someone, a man who lived in the forest. His name was Ren, and I think he used to be a student of Master's." The mother's face lights up. "Why didn't you ever tell me you found others living on the planet? I would sure love to meet them." The father gives an apologetic look and says, "I'm pretty sure he's the only one out there, and I'm also pretty sure he's the only one who can help us now, if our son truly is getting sick as you say he is." The mother then asks, her face hopeful, "Do you think you can find him again?" The father shuts his eyes for a very long time, and when he finally opens them again, we see that he's watching his children play. Finally he nods and says, Yes, I think I can. To save the ones I love, there's nothing I wouldn't do." And as he says that, his eyes suddenly seem to hold shame, and he looks down at the drawing of the master sitting atop a planet that he's etched in the sand, just as a wave comes in and washes it away. We then switch scenes and find ourselves in some type of workshop cluttered with all sorts of tools, machinery, pieces of droids, and so on, and in the center of it all, switched off and seated upon a work table, is the protocol droid TC, and standing next to him, speaking to Luke, Ahsoka, and Sabine, is Lando Calrissian, and he's saying, "I'm sorry, Luke, I put my best people on it and they couldn't get anything out of him. Whoever Palpatine had programmed this droid is better than anyone I've got on my staff." Luke sighs and nods his head in understanding. He then looks at the strange moss-covered tablet that's next to TC on the table, a tablet with an etching of a strange masked man sitting atop a planet with lines branching off to other planets, a tablet he found in a Jedi temple. Luke asks, "Did you learn anything about that?" Lando frowns and says back, "Got in touch with the best experts I know, and not a one of them had ever seen anything like it before. There's this one other guy I could have take a look at it, but he likely won't know anything either. But it wouldn't take long." He then turns his attention to Ahsoka and Sabine, and with a smooth smile on his face says, "It'd be just long enough for the three of us to get some dinner." He glances at Luke and finishes. You'd of course be invited as well, Luke, though I'd understand if you needed to meditate or do whatever else is you Jedi do with your free time. That's when Ahsoka, ignoring Lando's smile and looking just at Luke, speaks up and says, Time is running short, Luke. Wherever Ezra is, or has been, he's been relatively safe, until now. That's when Sabine asks, How can you know that? Are you able to speak with him? Ahsoka gives a shake of the head. No, I can only sense his feelings, his urgency. Something is happening wherever he is. Something terrible. She looks at Luke again and finishes. And if I'm right, he believes you're the only one who can stop it. Luke, his expression stoic, nods his head and says, Then we should go immediately. Thank you, Lando. I owe you one. Lando waves that away. Think nothing of it, Luke, he says, his eyes still on Ahsoka and Sabine. The pleasure was all mine. We then switch scenes and get a shot of a small Jedi shuttle parked on a landing pad in the middle of a large, bustling city, before we're taken into the ship, into the cockpit, where we see young Ben Solo watching as Lor San Tekka gets the ship ready for takeoff. Ben then says, So, you and my uncle have been traveling around the galaxy, looking for old Jedi temples, is that it? San Tekka, focused on the task at hand, only nods his head, and Ben then says, Aren't you a little old for that? San Tekka finally stops for a moment, gives a look to Ben and says, I'm not that old. Not yet, anyway. Ben gives a bit of a skeptical shrug to that, and then asks, And where exactly are we going again? I thought my training was going to start. San Tekka replies, We're going to look for a lost Jedi, and I'm sure Luke will have plenty of lessons for you along the way. Ben is quiet for a moment, then asks, Do you wish you could have been a Jedi? San Tekka smiles at the thought, but then gives it some thought and replies, That's a very hard question to answer, as you yourself know. Ben frowns and says, Tell me about it. I thought it was all going to be about fighting bad guys with lightsabers. I wasn't expecting all the rest of it. San Tekka stops getting the ship ready and then says, Like having visions, you mean? Ben nods and San Tekka continues, Like the visions you had when you touched your grandfather's old lightsaber. Again, Ben nods. San Tekka takes a seat next to Ben and says, Tell me, my new young friend, what exactly did you see? Luke told me that whatever it was seemed to trouble you a great deal. I'd imagine you'd like to talk about it. Once again, Ben nods, and then he says, But do you promise you won't tell my uncle? San Tekka has a look on his face like that's about the last promise he wants to make, that he wants to instead tell Luke everything that Ben is about to tell him. But finally, San Tekka nods and says, I promise, I won't tell Luke anything. Ben remains silent for several long moments, but finally says, Everybody wanted to hurt me, and I was too weak to stop them. San Tekka gives a comforting smile and says, Certainly not everyone wanted to hurt you, your uncle. But Ben cuts him off and says, almost frantically, Luke was one of them. He was going to kill me with his lightsaber. He looked so angry. San Tekka shakes his head. No, child. You clearly did not understand the vision. There is no way. But yet again, Ben cuts him off. I know what I saw. It was Luke, and he was going to kill me. San Tekka shakes his head again and looks like he wants to argue against that, but just doesn't know what to say. Finally, he asks, Then tell me, why are you here, Ben? If you truly believe Luke will try and kill you someday, wouldn't you want to be as far away from him as possible? That question seems to confuse Ben, and he says, Who else will teach me then? Besides, I'll be ready for that day. I'll be ready for all of them. San Tekka is now having a hard time concealing his fear as he asks, What do you mean by all of them? Ben looks like he's about to answer when suddenly he falls silent, and it looks as if he's listening to someone else, though we and Lor San Tekka hear nothing. Ben then says, I shouldn't have told you all that, and now you're going to break your promise, aren't you? You're going to tell my uncle everything I just told you. San Tekka offers an apologetic look and says, Ben, I think it should be you who speaks to your uncle about all this. But if you won't... Ben's look suddenly becomes very angry, and he says, But you promised. San Tekka sighs and says, I'm sorry, Ben. I feel I have to. And it's then that Ben raises a hand and holds it palm outward towards Lor San Tekka's head. He then says, in a voice that's not all his own, but rather holds a faint echo of another, darker, more sinister voice, You will speak of this conversation to no one. You will forget it ever took place. That's when the scene shifts, and we're now with Luke, Ahsoka, and Sabine, and TC as they walk up the ramp and into the Jedi shuttle, and we hear Sabine saying, So, remind me again how exactly we're going to find Ezra? Ahsoka responds, if my feelings are clear, Ezra is lost somewhere deep in the unknown regions. Sabine gives a confused look and responds, and how exactly is that supposed to help us? Ahsoka pauses, and the others stop and focus on her as she speaks. Many years ago, when I was a Jedi Padawan, my master and I, along with Master Kenobi, responded to an ancient distress call, and we eventually found ourselves in the most unusual of places. Before she can continue, Luke mutters one word, Mortis. Ahsoka gives a slight nod of the head and continues. There we encountered 3 strange beings, and one of them, the one called the Daughter, gave her life to save mine, and she has been a part of me ever since. Luke then says as he takes hold of his father's old blue lightsaber, Why do I think I know this place? Why do I feel like I've been there too? Ahsoka replies, her eyes on Anakin's lightsaber, because I believe we were there together once, and now we're being called back. Suddenly Sabine speaks up and says, That's great and all, but what about Ezra? Ahsoka turns and looks at Sabine and says, I think we'll find him there, or at least I hope we will. Sabine, a trace of anger on her face, shakes her head and says, No, I need more than hope. Ezra is counting on me to find him, and if you can't help me, I'll find someone else who can. Ahsoka smiles in a way to show that she appreciates Sabine's loyalty. She then says, All I can offer you is hope, and a promise from Ezra himself. Sabine looks confused. A promise? I don't understand. You said you couldn't communicate with him. Ahsoka replies, I can't, or at least I can't in a way that I could easily explain to you. But Ezra is in a place of immense beauty, like few others in the galaxy, and once you see it, he thinks you'll finally stop pretending. Sabine frowns and replies, Pretending what? That you're a warrior, Ahsoka answers. Sabine's frown grows and she says, I am a warrior. I'm a Mandalorian. That's our way. But to that, Ahsoka shakes her head and says, He doesn't think so. He's never seen you that way. He thinks you were born to be an artist, born to create things of beauty, not weapons of war. And when you find him, you'll finally find peace and embrace who you were meant to be. That's when we switch scenes, and we see an Imperial shuttle rising up and out of the atmosphere of a dreary brown, gray, and swampy world, before we're taken aboard, where we see Thrawn standing beside Mara Jade, as the two look out the front view screen at the world they're leaving behind. And soon enough, well beyond the gray world, another planet can be seen, a vibrant green one. Thrawn then says, Curious, it has a sister planet. All that time I spent upon it, and the sky never once cleared up enough for me to see it. Mara Jade then adds, Not only does it have a sister planet, but we believe there was a third planet once that these two used to revolve around. Funny thing is, the gravity of that planet still exists, but it's not actually there anymore. Thrawn's brow raises and he says, How fascinating. Mara shrugs and says, An intriguing mystery, no doubt, but one I don't have time for, and one you don't have time for either, Grand Admiral. Thrawn gives a tight-lipped smile and single, appreciative nod of the head. Mara then says, I hereby restore your rank and give you full command of the entirety of the First Order fleet, though something tells me Admiral Sloane might have a thing or two to say about it. Thrawn then says, First Order. Mara gives a bit of a shrug and says, Brundle Hux came up with the name, and no one's decided to question him on it. It's been the one thing we've seemingly all agreed upon. I see, Thrawn replies. Mara then says, Just never forget who it is you report to, and you and I shall never have a problem with each other. And while you deal with the politics and try to unify this First Order of ours, I'll be free to find Skywalker. Skywalker, Thrawn echoes. What Skywalker do you speak of? Mara looks at him curiously and says, Luke Skywalker, of course. That was actually his nephew Ben Solo that I need. Mara smiles at the confused look on Thrawn's face and says, But of course, you disappeared shortly before Luke Skywalker showed up out of nowhere, and if you believe the legends, single-handedly turned the tide of the war. Luke Skywalker, Thrawn repeats the name. How very interesting. And am I to assume this Skywalker is also a Jedi, hence his ability to apparently turn the tide of the war? Mara eyes Thrawn curiously and asks, What exactly are you getting at here, Thrawn? Thrawn gives a modest shrug. I met an Anakin Skywalker once many years ago. He also was a Jedi. He was in search of a lost friend at the time, and that friend was Padme Amidala, a senator from Naboo. Mara shrugs rather carelessly. Makes sense. Rumor is that Luke is somehow the son of the famous Anakin Skywalker, and that Padme Amidala is most likely the mother. Thrawn then asks, "And what do you know about the fate of Anakin Skywalker?" Again, Mara gives a rather careless shrug, that he was killed in the waning days of the Clone Wars, killed by Lord Vader himself, as a matter of fact, or so I was once told by my master, Lord Sidious. Thrawn gives an ever so slight smile and says, "And what if I told you that may not have been entirely true? At least not if my suspicions about Lord Vader were correct, which I have every reason to believe they were." Mara responds, "Just what exactly are you saying here, Grand Admiral?" But before Thrawn responds, an officer runs up to them and says, "Apologies, my lady, but something has just appeared. Something I think you're going to want to see." Mara and Thrawn exchange a look. "Something appeared," Mara repeats. The officer nods. "Yes, my lady, some sort of strange structure has just appeared where the missing planet should be." Again, Thrawn and Mara Jade exchange a look, and a moment later, they're looking at a monitor together, at a strange, large, cube-like structure positioned right between the two planets. Thrawn then says, "It appears as if this mystery may warrant further investigation after all." And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time, and this is once again where I'd like to thank the names you see on your screen who have been contributing their art throughout this series. And this is now where I'd like to invite you to tell me what you thought of this part of the story, and or what you think might happen next. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.